All right, looks like pretty much everybody's in place. I'd like to go ahead and call the meeting to order of the Northeast Ohio Sustainable Communities Consortium. My name's Jason Segedy. I'm the chair of the board, and would just like to thank again the people of Elyria and Lorain County for hosting the meeting today and for the hospitality that was shown, and give a special welcome to all the local officials that are with us. And I thought before we get started, if there are local officials from Lorain County and or Elyria that would like to speak before the meeting starts, I wanted to give you that opportunity at this time. So just go ahead and raise your hand if you would like to address the group, and you can make that happen. Mayor Burnett.
I think we already spoke, but
Are there any other officials who would like to speak before we launch into the agenda? Okay. Per our usual practice, we'll just go ahead and go around the table here real quick, just so everyone can get to know who's here. So I'll start here to my left and work our way around.
Hi, I'm Kelly Harris, Administrative Assistant at NEOSCC.
Tom Caroline, CEO of Great Lakes County Ministry, and the Secretary of NEOSCC. Vice Chair of Regional and the Secretary of Regional.
I'm John Phillips, the Hunter Rep, and the future co-chair of Regional.
Mike Challenger, of the Lorain County Growth Partnership. Jeff Douglas, Cass. Bob Howard, part-time regional planning, co-chair of the housing and community. Joe County Regional Planning Authority.
Jay Grant, Asheville County Planning and Services.
Aaron Siegel from the county and Lucy Miller, U.S. Department of Housing and Development.
Bill Davenant, Director of Community Development, City of Youngstown. Ron Schwartz, Senator, Regional Study, Youngstown State.
I'm Petrie Barcelona with NEOSCC.
Bill Miller, Director of the Trumbull County Planning Commission.
Rachel McCartney, Eastgate Regional Council of Governments.
John Getchie, Director, Eastgate Regional Council of Governments.
Emily Campbell from the Center for Community Solutions.
Frank Collier, Chief Planner, City of Cleveland Planning Commission.
Brad Chase, the Cleveland Museum of Natural History, and member of the Connections Work Stream, as well as the Communication.
Greg Brown, Policy.
Mike Lyons, Regional Prosperity Initiative.
Grace Carucci, NOACA.
Medina County Commissioner Steve Hambley, Second Vice Chair and representing NOACA.
Hunter Morrison, NEOSCC Executive Director.
Dan Manula, the Vice Chair, and from Mahoney County, and on the Environmental Work Stream.
Again, I'm Jason Segedy. I'm the Director of AMATS, which is Greater Akron's Metropolitan Planning Organization, and I'm on the Quality Connected Places work stream. Were there any board members that I missed that are scattered around? Okay, I don't see any. Next order of business is time for public comment. If there is anyone here from the public that would like to address the board, we do have provision on the agenda to do that. So if so, please raise your hand. All right, I don't think I see anyone. Next item, number 3 on the agenda, is organization and work program. First item under this portion of the agenda is the approval of the minutes of the June meeting. I do believe that all of you received those minutes electronically, and at this time we'll entertain a motion for approval. Moved by Mr. Miller, seconded by Mr. Getchie. Any discussion? Okay, we've got a motion and a second on the floor. All in favor, please indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. Next up is the presentation of current financials and budget update, and I'll turn things over to Ms. Barcelona.
Thank you. In your packets, you have the information, the month end June 2012, current status of expenditures and where we are in the budget. At the end of that month, we spent just under $1 million. You can see also your match in the document at just over $800,000. On the back of that, of course, is our cash position. You'll see our receipts are higher again. That is because of the way we draw funds from HUD. In advance, you have some contracts that are large, and so we have the funds available to pay on those contracts once you approve them. So our receipted funds at the end of the month was $1.4 million. Are there any questions on the expenditures, current financials that I can answer? The second document is your current contracts memo. If there's any questions there, you see your status as far as the available funds and what's been expended, as well as any invoices pending. There have been a few more added to this, so we have a few more pending than are listed here, but in line with what you see. This time I did separate it out where you can see consultant contracts, traditional consultant contracts, which are toward the effort, and then other contracts which are more operational in nature. Right now, I did want to highlight that we do have 2 open RFQs as well as 1 open RFP. The RFP, there'll be discussion about that a little bit later on the agenda, but the 2 RFQs I wanted to note is that we are looking for both legal and audit services. The audit services will be audit and tax for the next 2 fiscal years, and then legal services for the nonprofit. As you know, we are officially a nonprofit 501c3 at this point. So we need a firm to provide services in that area for us. So if you have vendors or firms that you work with, or if you'd like to just keep passing it along, those are open and available on our website. Once we have at least 3, if not more, we'll select one and it'll be closed, but it's open until filled at this moment. Again, the other open RFP is the analysis impediments to fair housing. We have 2 in the planning phases that are noted here, and then 1 completed contract or note here where we finished an agreement at just under the awarded funds. So we have a little bit of money left. Are there any questions on contracts or the status of our expenditures? So with that, I'll move to, please.
Are we asking the consultants to actually invoice monthly? Or do we have a process for this? I mean,
Generally
zeros or other things pending?
We request more frequently than monthly, but it's depending on how they've moved or their own internal processes for invoicing. At the very least, we expect invoices by the end of the year so we can close out books. But beyond that,
it's not really reflective of the actual work that's been done.
That's correct. There may be work and they just have chosen not to or have not yet invoiced us. So with that, I'll move over to your audit and tax return. So we have our auditors here with us today.
Hello, I am Michelle Crano with Needham & Moore, and I am here to briefly give you an overview of the audit that was completed for the year ended December 31st, 2011. First, thank you for having me here to do this presentation, and thank you to the staff of both NEOSCC and NOACA for their cooperation during the audit process. We really appreciate that. Just a couple things. I know you were all given drafts as part of the meeting materials, but a couple things that I'd like to highlight. Number 1 is that the audit was a clean audit opinion, unqualified opinion. It was prepared under generally accepted auditing standards as well as generally accepted government auditing standards. Just to highlight a couple of the figures, which you've seen them already, total assets and liabilities were approximately $160,000. Total revenue and expenditures were approximately $940,000 for the year ended 2011. The revenue was comprised of the federal grant at approximately $275,000, in-kind services of approximately $662,000, and foundation revenue of $860. Another item to note is there was a line of credit on the books with a balance of $100,000 at the end of the year, and that was financed through NEOSCC with borrowings up to $200,000 available. And then one item to note is that that was paid off subsequent to year end, so that is now at a zero balance. All of the significant accounting policies were adopted in 2011, the first year of the organization's operations, and they are all detailed in the notes to the financial statement. Also in your packet are communication letters, and I'd just like to highlight a couple of the items. The SAS 114 letter are communications with those charged with governance. And a couple items to note. Basically, there were no difficulties encountered when completing the audit. The adjustments noted were corrected by management, and there are 2 adjustments to accrue for additional expenditures in 2011, and a copy of those are on the back page of the letter as well. There were no disagreements with management throughout the process. We also requested a management representation letter, which was signed and received back, basically stating that all of the information was presented to us. And there were no open items, nothing happened subsequent to year end that might affect these financial statements. And lastly, we were not aware of any other communications with other accounting firms. Sometimes agencies will go for a second opinion on different matters, and we just ask that we are kept in the loop in the event that that happens. We noted no deficiencies that we consider to be material weaknesses as part of the audit process. And then the last thing I did want to note is the Form 990. Now it's required that a copy is given to the board prior to filing. And obviously we don't expect you to tick and tie the numbers. We don't expect you to make sure the form is prepared correctly. The point of that is basically so that you are all aware of what's included in that form, because as you may all already know, it is open for public inspection, so it is out there and available. And your names are all on it as members of the board of directors. So we just ask that you flip through it, just be aware of what's in that form, and if you had any questions that obviously let us know. We'd be happy to talk through it with you, Emma or Cheryl. So were there any questions?
The 990 was given to you in PDF form as part of the board attachments, but we have copies. We would have copies available, but we didn't print those all out. That's our attachment. Yeah. So we need.
A motion to accept? So moved.
Second.
Motion and a second. Any further discussion? All in favor of approval, please indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
All right, the next item on the agenda is item 3B3, which will be Mr. Mamula to discuss procurement standards modifications.
At the last executive committee meeting, that was requested that we revisit the procurement process for obtaining services to try to make it more efficient in terms of the time it takes and who is involved and keep it still appropriate. Emma had prepared a number of scenarios. The existing method that we have, and a number of scenarios to address some of these issues that may be expedited by changing the manner in which we handle them. What was done was a committee was established consisting of myself, Rachel McCartney, Grace Galucci, Sarah Meyer, and Tom Terrell. And subsequently, I took the liberty of looking at the 4 scenarios and putting something out that was a kind of a blend to start the conversation to the committee. But in order to make sure we get as much input there or insight as possible. It's also going to be on glass cubes for any other member to chime in. What you're going to be looking at is my attempt to start a conversation. I just kind of said, this is what I think I'd do, and then I had a conversation with Emma, who straightened me out on a couple things and need to be fixed. But nonetheless, the essence of it all is what I'm proposing. We can work from there. I didn't want to get into a zillion scenarios. We're not going there. But basically, I would like some input before the next executive committee meeting so we can finalize the proposal to bring to the executive committee on the 14th. So what we have is a number of scenarios that you'll see, and my proposed starting conversation on those scenarios, and then we'll go from there. And hopefully, between myself and the committee and Emma, we could solidify a proposal for the August meeting. Any questions of that? And there being none, I'm done, Mr. Chairman.
And then, Dan, just to clarify, so there'll be some follow-up at the next executive committee meeting, hopefully, if people get back to you.
There's going to be a vote whether people get back to me or not.
So this is your opportunity
I'm not waiting.
to weigh in.
If I could, really quick, while there's been obviously no decision that's part of this conversation, what's important here is that right now, any purchases above $25,000 comes to the full board, and the intention of these modifications is to move that threshold higher. We don't know where, but it's important that if you have opinions or takes on where it should rest, decision making and the oversight that needs to be present, but where you're comfortable and where things should be, to definitely weigh in and talk to Dan or any people on the committee, so that we, at the next full board meeting in August, that there be new standards approved, and we then operate with those through the rest of this grant period.
Yeah, that's good context. Thanks, Emma. All right, moving on to number 4 on the agenda, the report on the Board of Directors and Executive Committee. I'll cover the first 2 items. The Executive Committee has been continuing to work with Cureri, which is our firm that we've brought on to look at basically how we're organized. We've gone through a process. I think I reported on at the last board meeting for the last couple months. As part of that process, we've also had a couple executive committee meetings and executive sessions to talk about how we're organized both at the program management office level as well as on the board and the executive committee in general. So I did get an email out to the executive committee members that we're going to have a follow-up executive session after this meeting today, since most of us are here. But with that was really all I had to report on those 2 items, if there's any questions. Okay, not seeing any. I will turn things over to Sarah Meyer, who is going to give an update on the consortium membership agreements as well as the leveraged match.
Jason, I'm appreciating this.
Okay, Howard Mayer. That's right.
Just to point out, 32 members and leverage match of $954,000 to $25,000.
Any questions for Howard? Okay, we'll move forward. The 4th item under this agenda item is the 2012 Board and Executive Committee meeting schedule, and I believe Jeff Anderle was going to talk about this a little bit.
We do have a tentative agreement with Stark County to host the next month's board meeting. Bob and I are working out some details with that. And then moving forward after August, we'll be putting a schedule together for the 9 months following. So we'll be in contact with all of you going forward. But next month probably will be in Canton. So.
And that's the August 28th meeting, Jeff?
August 28th. We're trying to line up a big venue there.
Try to get into the Hall of Fame.
That's right. We'll be right after Hall of Fame week.
Reflected glory. Huh?
All right, well, stay tuned for that, and I'm sure that the staff will get announcements out on that as we get a little bit closer. And then just one more meeting to announce. The next executive committee meeting scheduled is going to be August 14th at 1:30 on the 8th floor of the City Center building in downtown Akron, where the NEOSCC offices are. And I think that moves us on. If there's not any questions on those meeting announcements, the next item is the Program Management Office report. The first item under here is the Operations Director search. That's really kind of wrapped into the discussions I was talking about earlier on the foundation work. I think all of you were aware that per the motion we had at the previous board meeting, we did put out a solicitation for a Director of Operations to help with some of the day-to-day management of the office and perhaps planning work as well. It was a very open-ended posting. If you did see it, it said that we could decide to fill it or not fill it. We've gotten quite a few expressions of interest, but really all those are going to be pending the discussions I was talking about earlier that the executive committee's been having as far as how the organization of the effort is structured. So I would say stay tuned on that one as well. And I think we're up to the next item, which is the 12 county zoning map, and that's Mr. Now and Mr. Kovac.
I'll start off real briefly and then turn over to Anthony. If you look in front of the room, you can see that on the left is a map that we've seen before. That's the existing land use for the 12 county region. That was derived from county auditor classifications for that. And then to the right is the existing generalized zoning map. This was a lot of work was put into this through the GIS folks at the 4 NPOs, but also some of the county GIS experts. I know early on in this process we had talked about developing a regional database, and I think this is kind of moving in that direction. We're developing a regional GIS database, and it's allowed folks that don't normally talk to one another, frankly, GIS folks, to build a kind of an informal network at this point. But we're hoping that we can, as we move forward through this, create something that is sustainable and creates regional capacity, which is part of the reason we're sitting here. Anthony will really talk about the more technical parts of it, but there is, just one practical benefit that has already occurred with this, in a minor way in Stark County, but I think on a more major way in some of the other counties. A lot of the more rural areas just have paper zoning maps. And what this allowed us to do, or not, the GIS folks, is basically they digitize all the paper maps. And that is an end product. I mean, it's a work in progress, but it is an end product. And that is moving things forward in at least in this narrow way, a substantial way. So it's a process. And so with that, Anthony's going to talk about this a little bit more, and then I think the RFP for the analysis.
Yeah, we'll go right into the next item. Thanks, Bob. The land use map, which is over on the paper map on the easel, that was about a 3-month process. We started in November. It was 21 members to the land use zoning map team, and we came together and had conference calls and discussions about what the land use map should look like and how do we create codes. But that process was leaps and bounds easier than this next phase, which was the zoning map, for a couple of reasons. First is the codes at the land use, on the land use side, if I go forward for a second, which are a little different. There's 8 codes here and then 9 codes for zoning. These are, for the most part, they're standard codes, but they're all tied to the auditor's files for land use. So there's really no discussion. There's maybe discussion on some of the merging of items, but they're standard codes. As opposed to zoning, I think there's like 100 or so land use codes, but for zoning, it all depends on, okay, that's zoning. Each community is so unique to the other community, and that was a much more lively debate on how do we create a 12-county zoning map that incorporates everyone's ideas of zoning breakdowns. And I did want to touch on how we kind of achieved this current legend for the zoning map. I'd like to at least start by saying that the draft for the legend came from the Connecting Communities, from this great MPO in Akron headed by Jason Segedy, and the Connecting Communities report, which AMATs through Jason's staff are members of the team, but also we leaned on them and everyone else on the team for input. But they've been through this. They did a complete zoning map for their 2 counties a few years back, and they've been through the pitfalls. They know what works. So basically, the residential codes that you see, someone had asked the question, well, how do we come up with those 5 categories? I mean, multifamily in a residential breakout is obvious, but where you get different residential codes, really from zoning code to zoning code from each community, is so different. But AMATs, for their reasons, had this breakout. Actually, they had another category of a residential breakout. In our discussions, what we decided on were these 5 codes for residential. And you'll see the acreage, the high, it's called solar yellow, is 0 to 0.25 acres in residential. So when you see the map, for the yellow, the bright yellow areas, those are the highly densely populated areas, besides the orange, obviously, for multifamily. From that, you get 1/4 acre to 1.5 acres in this next color. So if you stop right there, those first 2 shades of yellow, if you look at that, also internal discussions with our director, Hunter Morrison, and our transportation people, Kelly Britt, what density do you need to support public transportation? And at the bare minimum, you need that 0.5 acres or denser to support that. So basically what you're looking at in this zoning map for all the yellow areas are areas that could support public transportation going forward. Or another way of looking at this map is this is our development. I mean, going forward, this is how communities dictate or control development. And then we had some, again, lively discussions on the color coding. But it was difficult to keep all the residential colors the same color and have them come out in the map and make distinctions. So we decided to go from a yellow. These are all actually colors of yellow, but it's a lighter yellow here, and then kind of like a yellow green, and then a deeper yellow green, more green in there. And with the idea of more rural development is greener. So you get to the point where you have 3.1 acres or greater. I mean, we could have also named this category almost agriculture. And you see where it jumps out in Geauga and Stark County as that really low density residential. The category of agriculture in our discussions when we started this, so the zoning map started in February and it went to this month. So it was about 6 months for this work. Agriculture normally isn't a zoning category, but we from our input from the team, there were enough codes out there that we thought were ag. So we said, why don't we just keep it and we'll just see how it goes if there's a decent amount of agriculture. And you'll notice that in Lorain County, there's a decent amount of agriculture, and Mahoning County. A little bit of Ashtabula you'll see in Trumbull, but not that much, but enough. It was significant to at least note as a category. Then the other standard areas kind of follow the land use. Public service, we just gave it a different name. You could say government/institutional. one other thing that we're going to do is when these are available on our website for download, we are going to have explanations of these categories, which gives not only the person who deals with this every day an understanding or just reminder, but for the layperson as well, an explanation. You have the Ravenna Arsenal right here is a huge swath of land, and that's public service. There could even be some parks that are designated public service, but for zoning, many parks are within residential categories. So you don't see parks and there aren't parks as a zoning category necessarily. Development overlay is anything you think of mixed use, transit development, TODs, transit-oriented development, PUDs, planned unit developments, anything like that. And they're very limited, but in a way they're kind of an example of NEOSCC, how they might like to have things into the future. In some cases, it's a much more sustainable design. Or also protecting agricultural lands is again all about sustainability. Water is not a zoning code, and you won't find it on many zoning maps, but we thought because we're dealing with such a large area, and also to be able to draw a person's attention and eye to locations of bodies of water for points of reference, we thought to add that. And there's only a handful of communities that have no zoning, but you'll see for example, for Wayne County, it's significant. On the land use side, it says no data, but on the zoning side, the data, we checked it out. There is no data, which is no zoning. We also try to be consistent from keeping the same color palette from land use and zoning, because this next component of all this work that we're doing is to analyze the two maps and see how they overlay and start to add to the discussion. Why did we do this? And Bob touched on a few things. Another component is the other work streams. Economic development, I know, is curious to see land development. I know definitely transportation and environments. I mean, every other work stream has been waiting for this information to come to the surface, and we're going to share it with all the work streams and really with the whole 12 counties. We have the data that we're doing some minor cleanup on, but that will be released within the next couple of weeks along with these maps. The land use map isn't mounted on the board because we have some just minor adjustments we're going to make, so we're going to roll it up. And it's still not an official zoning map because we created these general land use codes for 12 counties. Individual specific communities will have, they might just have one area is called residential, or they might have some other, we had discussions, there were a few marina type zoning, and we had to just work through how we package that into a code. So it at least gives you a snapshot of the type of design, the development, or at least the planned development that we're going to have going forward. Bob mentioned the core team. Basically, the MPOs and Cuyahoga County Planning Commission stepped up to the plate for the NOACA area as well, for the 5 counties. But also the individual counties and staff at the MPOs were instrumental in this work. And you can't, I definitely don't want to say, okay, 3 months for land use, 6 months for zoning, that was twice as much work. No, it was more like 15 times more work. It's just that NOACA had 90% of this area already digitized. I mean, Amex was already done. I mean, a lot of people have been working towards this work, not on this comprehensive basis. So, and I'm just very thankful. I think this project embodies NEOSCC. I enjoyed working all the staff. Everyone was very professional. It's an unbelievable goal, but if everyone just, maybe not thought about how impossible it was, and how do you manage this work within your day-to-day job, how are we going to get this done, and then hit a deadline, we just did it. We just slowly went at it, kept with it, worked out any problems along the way. So I think that was exciting. This is just another example of NEOSCC. Thanks. real quick, even though this board meeting is really flying by, so Jason, does that mean we have until 3 o'clock?
Well, I was actually going to ask you a question because I felt like it was going too fast.
Oh, okay.
That wasn't my motivation, but I did. Well, first of all, thanks for your kind words. I should acknowledge, though, that I think NEOSCC actually did a zoning map back in 1999. So a lot of, for the 5 counties, so a lot of the trials and tribulations, I think, have been experienced by a lot of us. Great job. It's an incredible amount of data. My question was actually, with the categories that were used, is the data such that you could pretty easily in GIS, if you wanted to change the categories to see what's zoned for, say, under 1 acre? Is that pretty much just a click of a button, or is it aggregated together and it would be a little more difficult than that?
Grant, what do you think about that? Grant was an intern with Eastgate working on this project, and his internship ended up, and we scooped him up at NEOSCC on the technical side. Or Jeff, or whoever you want to answer.
Out of all the files I've seen, which has been working on the 3 counties that Eastgate had started on, as well as some of the Cuyahoga area, pretty much everything can be changed really easily. I believe one of the counties that I had done some cleanup work on did not contain all the information. Most likely, still the Cuyahoga Planning Commission has that information, but when for the most part, it's contained with, this is a residential low, but then we kept another column of data afterwards, which was the specific acreage that was the minimum size. So the data should be there, that it could be changed pretty easily. Thanks.
Another note to that I was reading, hopefully I don't repeat what you just said, some of it, was when the data files are released, we're going to have in one file by county, it's going to have the land use codes that are to that parcel, and then the NEOSCC land use codes, a column next to that, the local zoning code, and then the NEOSCC zoning code. So you'll have all 4 files, and they're parcel based, but at the same time, because of the zoning map, you have zoning that have like 3 types of zoning within one parcel. The files, when you pull up the files, it would have 3 parcels with the same number on it, with the 3 types of zoning. We tried to make it parcel-based zoning, parcel-based land use, and I guess that's the challenge you get into with the zoning. Zoning doesn't fit along the parcel lines exactly, but we did the best we could with that. Any other questions? And then I'm just going to wrap it up with some of the other reasons why we did this. Fred, and then.
First of all, I'd like to reiterate what everyone has said thus far, that this is a huge step towards the land use and zoning. My question starts with land use, and then it's going to go into the realm of zoning. And most of us who are planners do understand that the land use is really what should dictate the zoning. And your land use approach should be based on whatever your plan recommendations for your land resources are.
Right.
So my question to you is, as this process goes on, and as we undertake whatever type of approach that we're going to take in reference to projecting sort of how we want to use our land resources as a region, will that information be able to be uploaded into this future system to ensure that we get an idea of where we want to go? Because I'm hearing what you're saying is that this is how things exist today. So the question becomes, as a region, where do we want to go tomorrow, and how do we regulate that with our future zoning decisions? So I guess my question is, when you look at the land use layer that you have, was that based on projected plans from the various communities? Or is that something that can still be done if that was not the case?
The one part of that, I don't know if I lost it at the end, the current land use is what the county's auditors have in their files. So, existing, yeah, it's existing. But I think, and one of the reasons why did we do this, and the main thing to express to everyone is to support other NEOSCC work and the scenario planning on whatever level it is. This would feed right into that. on the land use and the zoning side. Anyone else want to add to that?
I think, what you get, we have an existing land use and a zoning map, which is kind of under the facto land use plan. And I think that's what you're getting at, right, a little bit. And this is not a land use plan. And that is something that I know Bill had talked about down in Cincinnati when they went through this process. It got a little tricky because when you're talking land use plan, you start marking, we're saying this should develop this way or this way. That could be a little bit more controversial because it obviously has implications. That could come out of this. I mean, and in Stark County, we have what we call a 2030 land use plan, which is more generalized than this, but ideally we use that when we make land use decisions as a guide to your decision making. So that could come out of this, but that's not really where we're at.
Exactly, I get that. My question and concern was, what do you envision? What do you anticipate this to be able to be used as, outside of just saying, here's the lay of the land today? To what degree can we take this work and use it as a tool for what we want to see, possible scenarios, for lack of a better word? Because I mean, people get nervous when you start talking about prescriptive sort of, this is how we want to see this develop. Me personally, as a plan, I don't think there's anything wrong with setting a trajectory. But I think that that's something that should be a part of this dialogue, as we move forward with this. And this is huge as far as that first step, I think.
This is really a great piece of work. Back in '99, when we did ours, there wasn't digitizing, so technology has advanced. But one of the things that I think, in response to Freddie's comment, this zoning map is really the statement of public policy for literally hundreds of communities. The plans that come out of it are not necessarily the statements of public policy. The zoning is, and it's been adopted by hundreds of city councils, and that's I hate to say this as a plan, but that's really a plan for the most part. But it's a statement of policy as determined by individuals all over this giant nation.
Let me give you an example, just to provide some clarity. In Cleveland, our zoning code is a little bit different, to the point where we have what you call a lot of spot zoning, where you have individuals who don't want to see something happens, and we get a letter of the commission saying that we want to change the zoning and stop. We recently undertook, probably the first time in my history since being with the Planning Commission in 12 years, a more proactive step to try to zone according to what we planned. And there were 6 communities we did this in, because our impression is that we can use the regulatory mechanism of zoning to increase the likelihood of our desired outcome. That made sense to us. And we were able to sort of rally council people around that in those particular communities. That put us sort of closer as things developed to sort of what the actual sort of vision was. Now, I know that's kind of difficult on a regional level, but I know you had to experience this when you were dealing with the municipalities, the fragmentation of the zoning codes in the various areas. They're extremely different. And maybe I wasn't paying attention over the last 12 years, but I really do believe that this work that's been done is really sort of that stencil that can really guide us down the path of saying, let's begin to sort of look at this more comprehensively from a zoning perspective as a sort of, and I hate using this word, but I have to, a regulatory mechanism to sort of help us further go into the direction that we all desire as a result of whatever scenario planning or whatever we come up with throughout this process. I think that's an effective way to sort of think about how we can evolve this whole zoning piece as it relates to the plans and the land use recommendations that obviously will come out of an effort like this, particularly if you're talking about scenario planning. So maybe you guys can help me understand that.
Let me just pipe in here for a minute. First of all, I want to say, Howard, I think when we did the 5 counties by hand, it took us a year to do 5 counties, or over a year, and we've done 12 in 6 months. So just I think this is an example of what both the technology and the collaboration can do. And I know John Getchie and the Eastgate group really worked with the Beulah County, which most of their maps are paper-based. So I think there's some real near-term benefit to participating. Let me make a couple of points. This is a generalized zoning map. It is not speaking to individual communities. It does point to some of the challenges we have about, as a region, around some inconsistencies. But I think it's really very important to recognize that we're not a local government. The decisions on how to zone your land are and will continue to be local government decisions, and in some cases, Bill, where county planning commissions intervene or play a role. This could be useful in terms of helping them to work with individual communities on their zoning. I think from our perspective, we see a couple of key values, and there's a real method to the madness of the classifications. As Anthony pointed out, the orange and the dark yellow get up to quarter-acre lots. Now, generally speaking, that is the minimum density to support regular transit, regular service. And one of the things this technique will allow us to do is pull out those areas, forget everything else, pull those out and then overlay our transit system maps, which I think we saw the existing conditions. You can understand, if one of the things we want to do is explore creating opportunities for reducing VMT through enhanced use of transit, the reality is you're not going to be able to get much transit in Joker County. It simply doesn't have the density to do anything other than demand responsive or, in some cases, parking. Joe's here to speak to some of the basic realities. So in terms of where you have transit supportable densities, we imagine pulling out the orange and the yellow on the map. You'll see where those communities are. Mayor Brennan, those are also, in many cases, the communities that are losing populations. If you begin to think about how we look at the density as an asset and where we can focus transit results. The other thing I think we'll find very, very useful is to be able to do some comparisons, particularly in the commercial and the industrial zoning. How are we zone commercial? That's all the red. And you can see in southern Ashtabula County a very large swath of red. I don't know what that is. But the reality is there's some zoning that doesn't really match up with economic reality. Well, what does that mean for the region? What does that mean for individual communities? It opens up a discussion, I think. You can also, as Bill Miller pointed out, when you get basically an acre and a half or above, you're basically getting into septic zones, areas where you do servicing by septic. Well, that perhaps gives you some sense of where your water quality work is going to be a challenge. So I think this begins to paint some very broad pictures. But the other key use for this at this point in time is this is the plan. I mean, when Freddie were doing the civic vision in Cleveland, we said, well, if you want to see what the plan for the city of Cleveland is, absent anything else, it's in the zone. Because as I used to say to the folks, if you want to go into the kitchen and you want to get beef Wellington and you flip the page and cheese souffle, you're not going to have beef Wellington for dinner. What's in the code is what gets on the ground. All of those decisions are local, but what will be very useful and key to scenario planning is establishing what the baseline case is.
Right.
Going out to 2040, if this continues to be the zoning and the patterns of development continue the way they are, then you'll get cheese souffle. This will be very helpful and useful to say where the codes say we want to go. And then if there's a regional consensus about or consensus in individual counties about wanting to change things, doing it differently, what does that mean in terms of changing your zoning or your land use code? All of which are local decisions. This is not a body that can make those local decisions, but this is a body that can put those local decisions into a broader context. And Bill, perhaps work with agencies like your county planning commission, which have a broader than municipality role to play to help communities say, well, here's, commissioners, here's the direction that we're headed if we don't change things and we don't work with our constituent townships and villages and cities. But I think there are a couple of key tools in the near term in terms of balancing between what's zoned and what's happening, and give some sense of where the constraints and opportunities are.
Anthony, first of all, everybody in this room has a better idea about zoning maps than I do. It's not very expertise, or what I learned about it. But realizing we use the 64 letters of Crayola already, and you can't have everything in a single map. I come at it a little bit different. I look at when you see somebody that says, who else is going to see this map that's not in this room? Who's going to be looking at this map as part of our process? Who's going to be looking at this map and we pitch this to HUD and maybe it's something that carries on further? So one of the things that strikes me on this is we as a region, one of the great values we have is our park space. We have 33,000 acres in the only urban national park in the country. Park service, we've got incredible capabilities by the West Reserve Land Conservancy, which is done in that process. We've got incredible parks in each of our communities that I, in my mind, non-political mind, supersede zoning pieces. And so as we look at this doesn't tell me the total story. It makes it look like here's Cuyahoga County with all this yellow, but if we put all the park space that we get into that process, it's not as yellow as it would be. And I'm concerned that if this becomes a major map, and Jeff did a great job last month showing us 32 maps that we had on that list, we can pick the one we want. I'm concerned that this map becomes the map everybody goes to be able to look at it, and maybe they're not educated in the whole zoning piece, and they're not seeing the parkland piece on that map, which is significant acreage.
Well, that's why we're not going live with this necessarily yet till we get that education piece set up at the website level and even with our core consortium members to educate them. This is the methodology, this is how we did it. So as you express or explain it to your people, as much as possible, that change, that communication stays tight. And then also, zoning wouldn't be the only. Hopefully, these two maps are in tandem with each other in the same discussion. And you do have a parks open space section. And Jason had picked this out. When you look at it from the 12 counties, the national park just. Even you being born and raised in Akron, or not, I don't know, were you born and raised?
Yeah.
Okay, I know you were raised in Akron, but born too. He said it's just striking that, even though he's from that area, how, it's centrally located and the magnitude of it all.
Well, the other piece I think, though, too, is, and I appreciate the combination, but if you take a look at the Conservancy now in 13 counties, I guess, and the amount of land that they've got set-asides on it isn't going to be used and stuff. That to me is as important as park space and looking at what our total lay of the land is. We need to find a way to deal with that.
Okay, that's a good point.
Yeah, Tom, that was one of the points I was going to make too. Indeed, knowing some of the areas, I agree. And I think Hunter made some good points. The one, and thank you for going back to the generalized zoning. The one thing that hit me first off is the amount of area that doesn't have zoning, but also recognizing that of that, Wayne County largely doesn't. But they have other mechanisms that they utilize in terms of managing their growth. And it has to do with the decisions not to extend sewers out. And I think there's been comments made about that. And so it's just not about the use of police powers in terms of zoning, but it's also our decisions about infrastructure investment that has probably just as much direct impact on the character development that goes out from those areas.
Absolutely. The one point I want to make, Stan, along with Tom's piece, for example, if you went out into a community engagement process and there was a thematic piece that was brought up consistently by communities that we want more green space. And this is sort of where we want it. This is the pattern of what the community would desire as far as green space and an increase in green space, utilizing vacant land. Once that's identified, could that be added to the land use map? And then the question becomes, if that's the consensus, how do you ensure the likelihood of that happening? And I'm just trying to understand, you're saying that zoning would not be that mechanism to do that?
There are a couple, so the zoning is the zoning. And understand that part of the process is essentially a set of overlays. Like we said, you could pull out the darker yellow and overlay the transit system and see where the gaps are. You could also, to Steve's point, identify where there are sewer moratoriums or decisions not to extend or conservancies. If you look, I was struck, Steve, when we were out of leadership in Medina County and heard the presentation on Western Reserve Conservancy, how much of Geauga County is really under conservancy. So that becomes another way of identifying essentially locally mandated land use controls that aren't zoning, they're something else. I think you wind up layering these. This is what it is, but it does point up that there to Steve's point, there are other ways that communities exercise their rights. And I know, as Steve, as you and I have talked about Medina County, how some areas have grown and some areas haven't, and it's not about the zoning, it's really about your extension of sewers and other infrastructure that really determines, or the size of the lots that are actually being developed that determine whether an area is subdivisions or more rural in character. Right?
Yeah, just two questions. One is, do we have percents in these categories? Are we able to generate percents?
Not
Yes. Yeah, I mean, we don't have right now.
Yeah, we just as we did with the land use, we were able to break it down and say almost half of the land use in Northeast Ohio is agriculturally classified, and only about 2% is industrially classified. One of the things we want to do then is say, okay, if that's what it's classified, if there's 2% of the land area is classified and 5% of the land area is zoned, that tells us something. And how does that compare county to county?
And it seems even in our scenario of planning, what we're talking about potentially is shifting percents of locations, not wholesale what's been built here, what's happened over the last many decades, but talking about moving percents of people.
Well, the other thing is to look at and this came up in some of discussions with some folks in the business community in some of the counties. There's an awful lot of land that's zoned commercial or industrial that's in the middle of farmland that's not going to be likely used that way for some period of time. Maybe that's the sort of discussion that ought to be had within the county about, is this realistic? So, I mean, it can get very subtle, but this is, again, just a starting point. And what we wanted to do today is really give you that. But one of the key next steps is the balance across the region and the balance by county. And I remember, Steve, when we did the presentation many years ago in Medina County and realized the zoning is 2.5 or 3 times what the population was at that time, that began to cause people to ask, is that what we really want? And it's for 15 years really working through different ways to get it. But this is the starting point.
And then just a follow-up that you mentioned as well, just the water and sewer, is that a map that we can have generated by consultants or staff? I don't think that was one of our existing conditions maps.
There is a map, and that, I'm glad you asked that, Brad, because I think the infrastructure piece is huge, because to me the zoning, it creates conditions or makes it legal to build something, but it's the infrastructure that creates the demand. I mean, if there's not a highway, if there's not a sewer, in connecting communities, we did take a stab at putting together, I think we had 12 or 13 counties working with NEFCO. We put together areas that are served either by public water and or sewer. It's a pretty rudimentary map. I think it would need a lot of work, and we didn't have data for all the counties. But Anthony, I was actually going to ask if you guys were planning on maybe as a next step trying to tackle that issue too.
We could. I mean, we didn't necessarily. We talked about the next step is looking at long-term management, working with other work streams, and analyzing the work. But that's another natural stuff, because that does tie into the cost of development that I think everyone's been asking too.
Because I was going to suggest if that's something we want to do collectively, I think that's an important one to start with. Because another piece of that puzzle would be the transportation plans, but those are pretty easy to get a hold of, whereas the water and sewer, we didn't even attempt at AMATS to go to the next step of figuring out who provides water and sewer in all these areas, because in a lot of cases in the same neighborhood, there could be 2 or 3 public water providers, and but I think that if we could make headway on that as a region, that would be great. Go ahead, Joe.
I've talked with Joe McDonald about doing that, and I see that a water and sewer line map as another legacy kind of project that the SCC could consider. One will detail, would drive up the cost, of course, but with water and sewer pipes, they are standardized sizes, so you have the potential for some efficiency there.
Joe, would you be willing to head up a subcommittee?
Sure.
Because I actually think you would be a great person to.
Well, I know, Joe and I.
No, I don't
know, and at one point he said, quote unquote, they were working on it, but I don't know where that is. So, I'll have to look into that.
Sure.
And I was going to say, there's also the Data GIS Committee. This project was really just a project that was out there. And it transcends all the work streams, but, the long-term development of it or a subcommittee through it, I mean, that's something that could be pursued. There's another question here.
Sure.
Hi, my name is Peter Bulti. I work with a group called Diversity and Inclusion for Minority Enterprises. It's interesting that 1999 was referenced. I was in community organizing work in Capital County. When all that was unfolded, often we came from Minnesota. We did they go around. This is the Vermont. But a few people have raised concerns here that were not addressed because ultimately somebody said the land use decisions, the zoning decisions continue to be local decisions. In other words, localities will decide what comes in the other area. But when you put together something like this that can inform the development of regional infrastructure, to what degree then does the lack of representation of some communities at these deliberations constitute obstacles that we need to anticipate and come up with a plan for continuous engagement? Because I can tell you that putting something on the internet should never be presumed as letting the public know.
Right.
I found out about this through a meeting I went to in Summit County. And I can tell you somebody from the city of Lauderdale, India, they can speak. I don't think there is that by election where some communities left that because they didn't buy into the vision? And how do you constitute yourself and how are you going forward, going to continue to engage other communities so that if larger benefits like infrastructure development flow out of it, those communities are fully engaged? That's my question.
Well, I could take a stab at that, and if other board members want to jump in. I think the intention when the consortium was put together was to grab the larger levels of government at first, the metropolitan planning organizations, which have as part of their boards all the local governments, and to bring in the counties and some of the larger cities. But I think you raise a good point. The intention has always been, even though we can't have, because it wasn't practical to have a board of 200 local governments sitting around this table, that the intention is, I think, to bring in elected officials and representatives from all the smaller levels of government through some of the work streams and the other activities that the consortium has been taking on. And I think a lot of the engagement activities that are kind of at their inception stage right now are going to help address that. It's an important point.
Carol from Iowa County Planning, and I want to connect a few things I've heard today with my experience. The scenario planning that we're talking about to show people if we built out, what would this look like? And the idea that people want green space nearby. My experience has been that community leaders look at their zoning code and think, okay, we're residential, we got some commercial, but we're residential border to border, we're safe, we're good, until people start using that zoning to build things. And then all of a sudden they're not happy with their own zoning. So there might be sort of a perfect moment to show people that when you're not happy with your zoning locally, look, it's not working regionally either. Just a thought.
To keep us on track, if there's one more burning question for Anthony, we'll take it, but then I think we should move on to your next item. Any other questions or comments? Okay, go for it.
All right. The RFP that's currently pending, that's out, the close is coming in a couple weeks. We, as staff, just wanted to remind the board to look at their attachment that shows the RFP. I'm not sure, I know there's some people that aren't familiar with analysis of impediment plans, but many consortium members either directly create them or are part of a group that does them. This is also something that HUD strongly supports, that we do this endeavor, and it's not that far of a stretch because really the core of what NEOSCC is about is wrapped up in this RFP when you read it, in the sense that you can't be sustainable if you don't have housing choice for all socioeconomic areas in the ladder, high and low, and also trying to connect where there are some lower income or minority areas with public transportation, housing, to those centers of jobs, and vice versa. I mean, it connects all of these areas, all of these work streams that we're working on individually, we've constantly said this before, breaking down those silos. But for the people that are new to analysis of impediments, they really are a barrier to having neighborhoods and communities really thrive. I say I'm a Patriot. Barcelona on staff is the most equipped to answer any questions that anyone has about this going forward. We have a couple more weeks, but we just wanted to give the board a heads up that if everything goes smoothly, in our subcommittee of consortium members that put the RFP together, we could have an agreement or a recommendation to enter into an agreement at the August board meeting. So please take time to look it over. Any questions either right now or over the next month, please let us know. Thank you, Jason.
So a few things of note. Anticipate that this will be a very large contract. That's why we wanted to bring it up again today, so that you knew for next month that, assuming that we have a vendor in place, that it will likely be large. That this will really be an analysis of housing, segregation, and other inequality issues across the 12 counties. So this is something bigger and broader than is ever done, but understanding that housing choice and fair housing in particular, it's expressing market failures, and that's keeping all of us behind. And so that for us to understand what's going on across jurisdictional lines, which are jurisdictions, in particular entitlement communities, are the ones that typically do fair housing and analysis impediments to fair housing choice, that as we break down these local jurisdictional lines, we can analyze, or through our vendors, I should say, our consultants, can analyze this information broadly. We'll understand a lot more about what's happening in our region and where we have room for improvement, and where we can empower then local jurisdictions, local places, to look at how they do things and how they can make different, or maybe modify some of their decisions that will help improve choice. Because when it comes down to a perfectly functioning housing market, means more appropriate pricing, housing options, typologies for all of us, not just those on, say, the low-income spectrum or anything else. So that's what we're looking at. And as far as we know, we're the first consortium or first grantee to actually engage in this work. So we will be ahead of the stream, an innovator in this area. And so just look for more information next month.
And one point I also want to make, and this, Emma, this came up in our early discussions as somebody who used to put these analyses together, or contract these analyses in the city of Lakewood, that every entitlement community has to do one of these. And as Secretary Donovan said at a presentation recently, he used to do them as New York, and you just do it. The opportunity perhaps exists, and we will see, that in fact by doing a region-wide analysis which takes into account the 3 or 4 or 5 different housing markets but looks at the patterns overall, we could actually downstream help individual communities put their work into a broader context, and maybe, when this is really, Lucy, something that the grantee and HUD would have to work with, maybe reduce some of the costs by just as with the land use map, beginning to give a bigger picture into which the individuals, Lakewoods of the world, can then fit their work and perhaps save a little money at that. It also, I think, Joe, would help us as we look to remedial actions which may have to do with transit. And where are the inequities? Where's the transit? How does this work with housing plus transportation costs? Again, if we're only looking at individual jurisdictions and individual counties, we may not see the broad patterns in what's emerging as a regional economy.
Go ahead, Steve. Yeah, I was going to say, I absolutely agree. Our county, when we did our analysis of impediments last year, involved the 3 cities and the county. And I can say that I chair a committee on our housing network that we've taken a look at it and see what we can do actually combine. You're right, that silo effect, I think, it puts blinders on us. When you really do look at a larger group, you really do see things in common that actually you can take concerted or group efforts to address some of the issues. It largely ends up influencing zoning. And particularly what we found, our largest impediment actually ends up being some of the local zoning codes and the higher costs that are imposed primarily just because of, I'll just say, certain prejudices.
That's a great tie-in, Steve, because I was going to make that point too, that it's great that we did the zoning map, because ironically, like zoning in many cases is one of the biggest impediments to fair housing. So I think it's a nice foundation to build upon. Lucy?
Environmental issues are also becoming very prominent, and environmental issues also tie into social equity justice, and that'll come out of the analysis of impediments as well.
Joe?
Having looked through this, and obviously from the title, the focus is impediments, but will there be a component of having learned the various barriers, et cetera, and the analyses, suggested solutions? Will that be an aspect of this? I don't see them clearly in the scope of work.
I think it's in there twice. I don't see. I think it's in the scope of work. Scope of work 5G, and then I think F too, but I think G.
Proposed methods of correction.
Yeah. Okay, so G, and I think it was one other piece. I don't know if that's worded well enough to hit that.
I'm not even sure how to ask this question. But I guess in my mind, I'm trying to figure out, we've got the land use map, which kind of gives us the given. And I'm wondering if it wouldn't be beneficial to look at the cause and effects of these different disciplines we're looking at across the board, to see if there are some statements that we could extrapolate out of here to apply to that map. Meaning, I don't pretend to know the relationship between population density and transport. I mean, picking a simpler one, but the relationship you just mentioned to me, the relationship between population density and or the declining population density and transportation. There, I'm sure embedded in our work is a list of cause and effect relationships that could be overlaid on this map that maybe could help us figure out how to use the map and maybe how to make future policy decisions. Because I think what we're struggling with is we've got all this information and it's hard to know what to do with all of it. But just like we're trying to figure out how this all applies to fair housing, we've got that list of, 5 other areas that we're trying to apply this to. And I just, from my point of view, it would be helpful if we had a list of cause and effect relationships that maybe we could examine, look at the data that we have and see if anything pops out at us.
That's phase 3.
That's phase 3, okay.
Yeah, no, that's the analysis.
No, certainly, I think there's pretty clear relationships on the transit side. Somewhat less so. It's more complicated, I think, on the environmental side. But I think that's very important. Is how do we interpret this? And this is really the first effort at just doing it at a regional scale. So let's continue on that. We've got some very good staff expertise as well as consultants who can help us frame that up.
Any other comments with regard to the item on the agenda with regard to fair housing? There being none, is there a motion to authorize move forward with the request for proposals?
So moved.
First, moved by Hambley, second, Mr. Now. Any further comments or questions? All in favor, signify by aye. Aye. Opposed? Motion carries. Moving to number 6, other new business. Is there any other new business to come before the body?
Mr. Chairman, the chair asked that I just give you an update on scenario planning and the work program. As you know, we had a very constructive day-long meeting with a representative from Envision Utah, who was brought in as a HUD technical assistance folks, and I think answered a good many questions. There are a couple of things that have come out of that. One is that Kelly Britt and Joe McDonald are working very diligently to draft the scope of work to do scenario planning and to have that done, Kelly, I think by the end of the month. Is that correct? The second related issue is that I and Sarah Meyer at Grace Colucci's request are going back through the work program with a fine-tooth comb to adjust that work program to correspond to the broad methodologies of scenario planning that actually saves a considerable amount of time. We are working with Bill Miller and Kirby Date, who were the sort of core group on the original work plan, to make sure that we're sort of consistent with the general direction. That will then be used to, with approval of this body, be used to revise the formal work program that needs to be submitted to HUD along with a revised budget. I expect that our crafting of that draft revision should be done by the end of the week, sufficient to produce a new schedule. So those are the updates on that. But I think the scenario planning methodology really was a great breakthrough in terms of refining the work program to do what we need to do in a short period of time. And we are working with our consultant team that already engaged, particularly on the engagement side, to make sure that what we are looking at in terms of the types of events and that typically go along with doing scenario planning in a broad region like ours are in fact achievable in the time we have to work on this.
And Hunter, some of the work that I mentioned earlier that we've done with Terrari with regard to the work program, I think will continue to take place, and I think should take place in consultation with you and your staff. So I would like to request on behalf of the board at the August meeting that the staff provide a progress report to the whole board on where we are with the work program and which kind of, at least a high level, which products and which months.
Well, we will do that. One of the things I want to assure you, Mr. Chair, that the work that came out of the Carreri effort in terms of toolkit and dashboard and policies and prototypes is being worked into this. Some, like the dashboard, are natural components. Dashboard and toolkit tend to be natural components of traditional scenario planning, and we're showing how we think we can get those as results along with the scenario effort itself, so that we bring these two threads together in one single document.
Great.
Dan, let me clarify. Just to clear up an exchange that would involve a suggestion that scenario planning be done with Lorraine, I believe, City of Lorraine or Lorraine County, and we got kind of ahead of ourselves. Explain to me what the proposal is going to propose to scenario plan. Like, is it going to be scenario planning of transportation, scenario planning of a particular place on all levels, or what?
Our need is to do scenario planning across the region, with particular focus on land use and transportation over the long haul, the big investments. That's going to have to be broken down into smaller groups, but clearly the plan is a region-wide scenario plan. I will, just to clarify, we've had discussions over the last 6 months with various communities about interest in planning, and Don, I don't want to get out ahead, but I think Lorraine County's pretty entrepreneurial. And we had some discussions about where this might fit. I think we did get out ahead of ourselves, and as you know, Dan, I have been in communication with the county administrator, explained that the board has not made a decision about how best to proceed, but really appreciate Lorraine County's willingness to continue helping to flesh out what that really means in a local jurisdiction.
And that was, if I may kind of continue off of that, when we got to the point of actually going, we would like to do this, we'd like to participate, let's move this kind of forward, we had to start asking questions like, what is it? What is it that we need to do? What is it that we're going to provide? What are the levels of investment that we need to make as a county and as the communities throughout the county? As well as what is it that the consortium would be providing, what are their requirements, what are they going to need to provide, and what is the consultant was. Where we got to real quick was an understanding that we need to understand what the roles of everyone is to actually be successful in going through this process. I think we all understood what the end products could be. It's how do we get there, and how do we make sure that those end products are actually useful to inform us. And that was, I think, the one really good thing that happened out of getting out ahead of ourselves was all of a sudden we had to start asking a lot of questions really quick.
Oh yeah, I got a lot of questions. And a lot of people are interested. Don't get me wrong. I think the scenario planning, from coming up with this discussion we constantly have about plan and the future is probably critical to making a good decision there to save a lot of time and get something doable on board. So I just wanted to clear that up so that some people, kind of ask me, well, why there and why not me? And then, well, now we're going to go through a process, and that's fine.
But I think it did help us to tease out the sort of questions that a local jurisdiction has. So we'll be able to use those in our work.
Brad.
One other question, I guess, around the missions and trends platform that's been launched. I noticed there's been a little bit of participation from the public on it, a couple of comments, but there also hasn't been any responses or answers. And I think that this is going to be an engaging platform. One, you show the public when they're asking the question, is this included? What does this mean? The deal with the staff, the consultants, the workstream co-chairs, all of us at the table takes it upon ourselves to provide an answer, whether that answer is just for looking into it or let you know. Because right now it feels kind of dead on there. And I don't think unless we start answering those questions, we're going to get the kind of online engagement with that space. And I think it's designed nicely and it looks good, but I think we're going to put a little bit of time into it from this board and staff and consultants we've got here. Let's make that a priority going forward.
I think that's a great suggestion, and to further that, I think it would be great if the staff does see major issues or themes emerging that take place in discussion there, that they be brought back to the board, maybe just in the form of a report at least, and we would have the opportunity, if we decided to discuss those here and see if we could find some sort of consensus or response from a board perspective too. Any other business? Mayor Brenda.
I was just thinking about, obviously, we're going to be thrilled to get a pilot in the state of Missouri, but to be helpful to everyone, I'm wondering if it might not be beneficial to just identify a few areas, common areas, where we think we, as collective communities, could benefit from, studying an issue, applying the data that we collected, and developing that type of mini toolkit. And maybe the criteria for selecting a community is, or communities is, what common concerns do we have that are that we've already collected data for, that we might be able to immediately engage. And I don't know what the answer to that is, but the staff probably does. They probably use this data a lot.
Point.
Okay, well, one announcement, just to reiterate for those of you that might not have been here at the beginning of the meeting, we are going to do an executive session of the executive committee immediately following this meeting, and I'll see what I can do when this meeting ends to see if I can find us a smaller space. And if anybody from the facility is here, I don't know where I'm going, so you might be able to put me in the right direction. Thanks, Don. Any other business for the consortium?
We do have a Young Leaders event tonight in Youngstown. Sorry about the location and timing. We also have events coming up in Lorain, Canton, and Cleveland again. So I've been sending out those emails, and we're going to be sending out dates for community engagement coming up as well. And I think back to Brad's point, it would be great if everyone on this board could actually register as a member online of the platform. So that would be nice to see if we can get some board activity online as well.
We're going to take attendance?
No, I'm not going to take it. That's it.
Actually, that was the point I was going to make, because he asked about community engagement, and I was going to ask if Jeff would announce his meetings.
Great. And Mike, I think.
Yeah, we're going to have an after-meeting at the Jackalope Lakeside at Spitzer Marina, and I was asked by management there how many people plan to attend.
That sounds like more fun.
I think that's where the problems will be solved. All right, thank you.
Next morning, we realized the change.
All right, if there's not any further business, could I have a motion to adjourn?
No move.
Second? All right, you're adjourned.